just had a wonderful dinner this evening chatting about his books and his writing career thus far. But he is taken on a topic that obviously you all have an interest in. Something different. Most of the histories of the Battle of Gettysburg, particularly Pickett's charge, have been taken from the Southern perspective. Bruce's book on Pickett's charge is looking at the other side of the story. So, Bruce, why don't you come on?
Thank you.
If you wouldn't mind putting that on.
Yep, that's fine.
And again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. No, thank you for everything.
It's a pleasure.
And let's see, what's the best way to do this? Do I have to stand in any specific place for the?
Stand in any specific place. That's why we've got the lapel mic there.
That will work. Okay.
We got this angle of the room with the camera.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out to hear me tonight. And I am so glad I've been able to come out and see people, even if you have masks on. But it's just kind of in person. I've done a number of Zoom presentations, and I tell you, I just like this the best. And this is a great time for me to be here for two reasons. One, we're on the day before the anniversary of Lincoln and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address that he gave. And two, the venue, the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. If you get a chance when you're finished, I have a map that's actually from the J. Howard Wirt collection that I'll talk about a little bit. And it has the hospitals after the war that treated the soldiers from both sides. So I thought this was a really great venue for it. And also it's a great map to show where just things happened. It's a good map of Gettysburg anyway. As Matt said, I've taken on a little bit of an unusual topic, and I want to tell you how it came about. First of all, I got started in all this when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and my grandmother gave me some newspaper articles from the Civil War written by my great-great-great-grandfather. And his brother actually was at Gettysburg and wounded in the wheat field. That's where I got started in newspapers, and I spent a lot of my career as a newspaper person and writing books and history, and I used to go to Gettysburg a whole lot. I remember as a kid being up at Devil's Den and thinking I'll never get out of there again, with all those rocks. I think a lot of kids do that. So up there, and I was there a lot, and I never thought about doing a book on Gettysburg. Because how many thousands of books of Gettysburg, right? There's just a lot of them. Actually, when I was researching my first book, I was at the Union League in Philadelphia going through some of their records. And I actually found somebody that wrote in the 1880s, that's 1880s, that there was already too many books on Gettysburg. So how did I get involved? Now I have 3 books. What happened, one day I was at the Angle, right at the end of Pickett's charge, 71st Pennsylvania. You can see the monument if you go up there. And I looked across that field. I said, well, I knew why Lee had to try it. He didn't, he couldn't retreat. That was the same as a loss. And this was one of their last chances to get the European countries on the southern side. So he had to try something. He couldn't just walk off that field. So I understand why he wanted to do that charge. I knew why Longstreet didn't want to do it. It looked suicidal to him, and the way the whole Southern strategy fell apart on that third day, it ended up being pretty much a suicidal charge. I knew about those 12,000 Confederates in that tree line, and that day I could look across and I could see that tree line, and you could almost visualize them coming out of those trees. I knew about the 150 artillery pieces that the Confederates had that fired, for over an hour on the Union troops. I knew all that. And then I took a step. I was here with the 71st Monument. I looked down that line, and my question to myself was, who was it? Who were they? What did they see? What did they experience? They must have had some great stories. They must, to face fire like that and basically save the nation that day. What did they see? What was their story? And I didn't know that much about them. So I went back and looked at all those books on Pickett's charge and the Battle of Gettysburg that I had, and I had a lot of them. Read a lot of them as a kid and growing up, and they were all written from the Southern perspective. Who was there? what happened, what went wrong, and the most important point, who to blame. The North sometimes didn't get mentioned at all. And here was, the nation was really, if they would have crumbled on Pickett's charge, the Northern troops probably been retreated back towards Washington. It was a victory for the South then that would allow France and gave cover to France and Great Britain to come in on the side of the South, because it was very much an economic decision for them. And you got to remember, at this point, we had a very, very unpopular president in Lincoln. A lot of people didn't think he was going to be reelected. You were a month away from the draft riots in New York City. You had the Copperheads really kind of wanting and proposing peace and make a settlement. So if they would have faltered that day at Pickett's charge, this very well could have been two nations right after that very quickly. So very, very important part of history. So, I kind of looked at that and I said, why weren't the Northern soldiers' stories told on Pickett's charge? And I said, the heck with my first thought, this book needs to be written. So I called my publisher, they agreed, and that set off about 3 years of a lot of time at the national park, that nice new visitor center with the cyclorama. Yeah, well, I was in the basement in the research library. And I tell you, they were really good. The head historian there, John Hessler, was really good to me. I come in, I have a plan of attack, every morning. I say, I want this, and this unit, and he knew what I was doing. I was trying to get subjects. And after a while, he'd say, hey, Bruce, you forgot this one. You didn't ask for it. And I knew I was finished then when he came out and said, you've seen everything we have on Pickett's charge. So it didn't stop my research, because I still had things to do in New York City and Philadelphia with General Webb, because I really kind of honed in on the Philadelphia Brigade. When I do my history books, I like to do it from a people or a unit or something, because it's what you all do that makes history. And if you can really relate to it and follow a person, or if you had somebody who fought at Gettysburg, or whatever the subject is, it just makes it so much better and so much more interesting. And that's that's what I like, because sometimes people look at my book and say, well, you do true crime and you do sports and you do mainly history. I'm all over the place. I'm not. Each one of them has a personal, kind of behind it, the personality, what they did, whether it's good or bad. It's just kind of fascinates me why people do things. So that's what really gets me going. And I wanted to do that, of course, with the Pickett's charge. I started the research. I live about a 2.5-hour drive from Gettysburg. So I'd call and make sure the library was open each day, and I'd drive up and be there at 9 o'clock and stay till they kicked me out, and occasionally they left me in later if John was going to be there. And I'd fiercely write and take notes and copy things that I was able to, and whatever I could, not to waste any of that time. And sometimes I really, really didn't comprehend what I was doing writing until a little bit later. And what I like to do with my books, I like to find something that's really dramatic that will kind of draw you into the book. One day, I did that frantic research. I was driving home on the turnpike, and you remember 3 Mile Island with the big... Well, I could see him. I was crossing the Susquehanna. I kind of hit myself in the head and said, 11 o'clock this morning, you had that beginning of this book. And it just kind of sunk in. Yeah, that's it. And what it was a letter that General Webb, and he was the head of the Philadelphia Brigade. He's from New York City. You got to kind of visualize this young West Point officer, steeped in military history. His grandfather, was on Washington's staff. A disputed story about maybe Webb's grandfather held the Bible when Washington was sworn in as president. And if I find stuff I'm not sure of, I'll let you know. I'm not sure, but this is a story, and that was one of them. But it was a family really steeped in history. His father owned newspapers in New York City. He was a envoy of President Lincoln to some of the South American countries. So he was really steeped in history, and he was a very proud West Point graduate. And he wanted to do his best, and and he was known for this. He was young. So what I saw that afternoon was a letter that he wrote back to his wife the day after the battle. And in it, it basically said, I wanted somebody to shoot me. And what it was his line where Armistead's troops broke through. It was his line, it was his responsibility, and he told his wife, I thought I lost the whole battle, the war, and when Armistead and his troops came through, I just wanted somebody to shoot me. That's pretty dramatic. That's back to his wife the day after, but I thought it really shows the intensity, and these guys weren't fooling around. They were there to protect the Union and their homeland, and all those Pennsylvania soldiers that came just to protect the state. That was really intense, I thought, and the way he wrote it. And so that's really how I started off the book with that. Then I backed up, talked a little bit about him going to West Point and how he got appointed and how he became head of the Philadelphia Brigade. And he really took over the brigade about the same time that Meade took over the Army, the Union Army, right before Gettysburg. It was just a couple weeks, or 10 days, I forget the exact time, but what's in there, when Meade was appointed, and he was changing around some of the troops and brigades. That's when Webb got the Philadelphia Brigade. Philadelphia Brigade, pretty good fighters, discipline, not so much. They were stragglers, they deserved for a while, they'd come back, but they were pretty good fighters, and the Union hierarchy wanted some discipline. So who better to go to than Webb, the young West Point, who wanted to do everything by the books, and that's what he did. He went in there and he tried to change, which he did, the whole dynamics of the brigade. The first thing he did, he got all of his officers mad at him. They're walking around and they don't have their stars or their ranks on it. And Webb said, what are you doing that for? And when I heard their answer, I said, boy, that sounds smart. He said, all those Southern sharpshooters try to pick us off. And Webb said, put them back on. Because your men also don't know your officers. And they're not going to listen to your orders. Put them back on. So that was the first thing. There's a story when they were called to come up to Gettysburg. And they were trying to get in line. And you can imagine getting 10,000, 20,000 Union soldiers in line on time and getting off. And of course, there was delays. And Webb's unit was a little towards the end. They were behind time. So we got them in, and they kept on going. They came to this first river to cross. And all the men stopped. Took off their shoes, started taking off their shoes and socks, as they always did, so it doesn't get wet. Again, it's pretty practical, but it took time. Webb said, don't do that, into the river you go. And he wanted to be an example. He went out in the middle of the river and stood and said, come on, look at me. Until somebody pointed out he had on his riding boots, and he wasn't going to get wet at all. So you had all this, a lot of his men didn't really know what he did or how he looked, so this also was a detriment, and I'll tell you about when we get to Pickett's charge. But he was there, he's new, he's trying to get discipline, and they're rushing up to Gettysburg. They get there on July the 1st, towards the evening, first day of the battle. And Philadelphia Brigade, they're fighting for their homeland. And the first word that they get is a beloved Pennsylvania general, Reynolds, was the first general that was killed. Reynolds was a really, really big deal to Pennsylvania. Matter of fact, Lincoln wanted him to be in charge instead of Meade. And the official word, from what I can gather, was that Reynolds wanted to fight for Pennsylvania and didn't want to be overall in charge. Also, I'm told that Reynolds' family said, you better watch it, there's a lot of politics in Washington. Can you believe that? Politics in Washington, in the Army. So he declined it and he stayed with his unit. He was a corps commander. So Reynolds came in, the Union was starting on that first day, and the South was coming in and they were pushing them. Reynolds is killed. That first day, the Union is pushed back. They get up onto Cemetery Hill and start the famous defense. When you really look at this battle, the South had a chance to win it all 3 days. And that first day, the defense started, the Union defense started what they call the famous fishhook. And if you were at Gettysburg many years ago, like I was, there was something called the electric map. Yes, yeah, it's still my favorite. I wish they would bring it back. You know, you go in, it's low high tech or low tech. I'm not quite sure how to do it, but it's a big map with little light bulbs. And I can't tell you the number of times I saw it, but I paid my couple bucks, go in, and you know, I watched everybody else. They rush in and they try to get the seats right through the door. I said, you're nuts. And I always went way around to the side because I knew where that line that would do the fishhook, and I can still hear that voice talking about the famous fishhook defense. And Culp's Hill was at the end of the hook, and Little Round Top was on the other end of it. Well, that first night, the South had a chance to take Culp's Hill and that fishhook. And if they did, there wouldn't have been a second or a third day at Gettysburg. But Lee, and the way he gave orders, he said, take that hill if practical. He should have just said, take that hill. And the commander of those troops had just taken over to Stonewall Jackson, who died at Chancellorsville the day before. And people think, if it was Stonewall, it wouldn't have been needed an order. He would have taken that hill. But they waited till the next morning. The North really fortifies it. And it became, the South tried 3 days and couldn't break the defense there. But if they would have done that the first day, it's over. You come to the second day. Our friends of the Philadelphia Brigade are now on the field down by the round tops encamped. The morning was kind of quiet. They moved them to their position where they fought off Pickett's charge the next day. And it's right on Cemetery Hill. There's kind of little farms and barns and right there. And today it's Hancock Avenue. And that's where they put the 72nd Pennsylvania. The famous copse of trees where Lee said, look, if it gets too much smoke and everything, you get lost, go to those copse of trees. That's where you're going to kind of all come together. And that was the Philadelphia Brigade in the 69th Pennsylvania. That was theirs. So the second day, they're starting to put it together. In the morning, afternoon, they didn't really have a whole lot to do. The fighting was a little bit to the south of the line. You had the famous, Little Round Top and the Savior there, and Governor Warren telling people get the troops up there, and you had all that going on. You had the problem caused by the line kind of coming out, and Dan Sickles moving his people a little bit too far into the field around the peach orchard. And Sickles thought he was the savior of Gettysburg, and he told people afterwards. But what happened when he moved his people out, it opened up a gap. And Longstreet almost tore the Union into two. Sickles, of course, paid for it. He lost his leg with a cannonball. Well, he didn't really lose his leg, did he? They took it back to Washington and used to visit it at the museum there. And Sickles is a really interesting guy. Can't say I really like him, but he was interesting. And he was the first person to use the insanity defense. I have two Sickles fans here. And what he did, he shot his wife's lover and used the insanity defense.
Philip Barton Key.
That's right. Grandson of Mr. Key.
Son,
Excuse me, son, you're right, son of the writer of the national anthem. That's right. He gets off. He's a New York politician. He actually, I'm told, went to Europe and to represent us over there, but was recalled because he was spending too much money on parties and stuff. And he kind of went into Tammany Hall until the war broke out. And then he was he was one of the political generals, and he went there. Something good about Sickles later is when they started making the national park, he was one of the ones instrumental to get it going. So you got a lot of good Sickles stuff kind of going there. Even though he still argued back and forth with Meade over who was really responsible for winning Gettysburg. So that kind of went back and forth. So you had that second day, and towards the end of the second day, you had some of the Southern troops come up towards the Philadelphia Brigade and try to break their line a little bit, and they were beaten off, especially by the 71st, who was fought there at the Angle, and one of their officers, a guy named Penn Smith. And Penn Smith wanted to charge and beat those rebels all the way back to their line. Webb said, no. You saw what happened to Sickles. Went too far, got us in trouble. No, stay here. We kind of won the battle. And Penn Smith, luckily, had some of his men pick up some of the rifles that were on the field. And the next day during the charge, they had the rifles reloaded. And some of them had 2, 3, 4 rifles once the Confederates got to the line. That first night, actually, Penn Smith took his troops over to Culp's Hill and to release some troops. He was told it was all kind of, night fighting's over. That was not happening. He couldn't find the officer he was supposed to reported to another officer, said, go over there. So Penn Smith takes part 71st, goes there and immediately gets caught in a crossfire. He pulls out, eventually goes back to where they started, and was later reprimanded for it, but he asked for a court-martial and was cleared of any wrongdoing because he was given improper orders as member at risk. He's there. So the night of the 2nd, and again, South almost exploited Sickles' issue. They almost, up and down that little round top, all the fighting in the Valley of Death and everything, they came close. So we had a third day, and Lee had to win it. Lee calls together. He didn't really call together his generals. Meade did it north at the Widow Leicester's farmhouse that he used as headquarters in Gettysburg. But Lee had an idea. And it's not as bad as what it looks like and what happened. His original intent was, look, all at the same time, we're going to attack Culp's Hill. Jeb Stuart has arrived. He was reprimanded by Lee, but he said, I was following your orders. And you kind of look at it, and he probably was, but Lee really needed him there those first 2 days. He told Jeb, take your cavalry. When they fight up Culp's Hill, you take the cavalry, you get in the back, and Mr. Pickett or Longstreet and whoever was going to be there, and the 3 corps, of course, you do the same thing coming front. So you got another attack at the same time on Culp's Hill, the front, and the cavalry in the back. Not a bad plan. His frontal assault was planned really to perfection. It was textbook out of what they taught at the various military academies. As I was doing the research, I did one of the tours with one of the people up there, what it was based on a comparison of that Pickett's charge with Eisenhower's D-Day frontal. You have to have more troops going in than you're opposing because you're going to lose some. If you look at where Lee was pushing towards that copse of trees, He did outnumber the Union. If you go out a little bit, he was outnumbered, but where he's trying to punch that line, you know, Eisenhower had the artillery, or had the air power. Lee had the artillery to do that. He put some of his strongest troops on both sides, so he protects the flank. You know, some of this was pretty much planned out, but he just kind of told Longstreet and everybody, you know, do it. And there wasn't that much planning in this, do this and that. He was just waiting for him to carry it out. But that's the way it was supposed to go that evening into the 3rd. We're going to do this coordinated attack, and we're going to drive that north off of that Cemetery Hill. Across the way in Cemetery Hill, you had Meade calling a council of war with his generals, again at the Widow Leicester's little farmhouse that he used as headquarters. And Sickles said that, you know, Meade was indecisive. He wasn't even sure if he was going to fight that 3rd day. And he kind of cites the questions that were asked to the generals that gathered there. One of the questions was, are we going to fight or are we going to retreat? Everybody's going to stick there and fight. Actually, it didn't matter because Meade had already told the War Department, we're saying we're fighting earlier in the day. He just wanted to see what his generals had in their mind. So you had that. Should we attack them or should we wait to have them attack us? We got the high ground, General. Let's let them bang their heads against us for a change. Make it much different than Fredericksburg. So they said, okay, we're going to do that. The third question is where they had a little bit of disagreement. If Lee doesn't charge us, what should we do? How long should we wait? Wait an hour, a day, 2 days? And there was a little bit of disagreement. Someone wanted, you know, immediately, someone would wait a day or so, but they generally are going to stay and fight. Then they started adjusting some of the troops because Meade thought they hit our left flank, they hit our right flank. You know, they might be coming up the middle, so they made some of the adjustments in the line. So you have the dawn, you know, July 3rd, really that pivotal day. And you had that attack on Culp's Hill in the morning. 3rd time's the charm? Nope. They get beaten back again. That's it. So the Culp's Hill is still in the hands, good defensive position of the Union. And what happened to Jeb Stuart? He went out there, but he never even got close. There was another young cavalry general fighting for the Union out there. You might have heard of him, somebody named Custer. Yep, he was out there. Custer, actually, from what I've been told, and did a little research, but I haven't finalized it yet, but he almost died the day before. There was another cavalry battle in a little bit outside of Gettysburg. He was actually knocked from his horse, and one of his men picked him up and got him safely away. But Custer was with one of the Michigan cavalry, and the Union cavalry would not allow Jeb Stuart in the South to attack the back of Meade's forces. So all of a sudden, 2 out of the 3's gone. They're not coordinated. And what do? You still have Pickett. And you have, it's called Pickett's Charge. There's really 3 divisions there. And somebody asked, why is it called Pickett's Charge? And my usual response is, he's got a better marketing department, I think part of it was, he was Virginian, Lee was Virginian, Virginians were pretty much ran, the Southern Army, so, it came down as Pickett's Charge, I think that was it. So Pickett and everybody was a little late getting on the field, getting in order, and so, in the morning kind of passed, you had the other 2 things going. Pretty quiet there with the Philadelphia Brigade. A little bit where I got the research. I looked at everything they had at Gettysburg and other memoirs and stuff, and I also had access to a court case. Very important. I'll tell you about it a little bit later, but it actually dealt with the placement of the monuments because it was dealt with the 72nd Pennsylvania, which originally should have been, it was back around Hancock Avenue and they wanted to be put up at the stone wall between the 69th and 71st. It went to court, and I'll tell you about it a little bit later, but in that testimony, it was firsthand accounts. I was here, this is what I saw, this happened, this is what we were thinking about. So that there was a lot of that good firsthand accounts. When you research and do it and write it, you got to be a little bit careful because what you see is just kind of right in front of you. You don't see much over here, over there, so you got to watch perspective. But this was really, really, really good firsthand accounts of what's going on. And some of these soldiers said, that morning it was pretty quiet. We were talking among ourselves. Do you wonder what they're doing on a lazy, warm Friday in Philadelphia? Some of them thought, well, maybe we can take a nap. General Gibbons was there on the field. He hadn't had anything to lunch. So somebody said they found a scrawny stewing chicken and made it up for his lunch. It was all pretty quiet. And then, about 1 o'clock, that first cannon shot went. And second. And before you know it, 150 cannons opened up. And it was where they were aiming. They wanted to soften up the Philadelphia Brigade right there at the copse of trees and the stone wall and the Delaware troops and New York troops, Connecticut troops were all around. But they were getting hammered. And the troops, the northern troops, couldn't go anyplace. They really had a deadline. This had nothing to do with newspapers. They said, you cross that deadline and we shoot you. So the Union soldiers weren't going to skedaddle and back. They had a little bit of tree cover. What really saved them, but they did take some casualties. A lot of times they said, they didn't lose many, but they lost hundreds. They're either wounded or died. The Confederate fuses were cut a little bit long. Some say they were defective, but they overshot where the Union defensive line was. And they came down the hill, and if you ever go there, you'll see Meade's statue up on, with the big horse, and there's the hill, and you go back as Leicester's farm. Well, that's where a lot of the shells landed in that farm. So much that Meade had to move his headquarters more than a mile down the road as all the shells came up. When Leicester came back to her farm, she said, the whole yard was littered with dead animals from the shelling and men, and just an awful scene. So this was horrific. And what the Union soldiers were saying, all of a sudden, the heavens opened up. It was like hell on earth. All these shells and men dying and friends, and just all this going on. And they stood there and they withstood that barrage coming at them. They had the Union artillery was a little bit less, like 90 artillery pieces were firing back. 95 I've read also. They were firing back. And the Union stopped. Artillery, General Hunt said, look, we know a charge is coming. We need to save the ammunition. We got to change the cells. Stop and let's get ready for this. Hancock says, what are you doing? Keep firing. Because if you don't, my men are going to get demoralized and that charge is going to overwhelm them. Keep firing. We got to defend our men. And some of the units stopped and obeyed Hunt. Some of them kept firing and obeyed Hancock. And again, that is another argument that kind of went on after the war. One of the artillery units was a Cushing, and Cushing was just awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor when President Obama.
Starting route to 330 Mountain Laurel.
No problem. Getting an early story. Cushing was given a Congressional Medal of Honor when President Obama was president, but Cushing was wounded in that first barrage and he lost some of his weapons. And there was a hole in that front of that Philadelphia Brigade. And Webb's first thought was, let's move the 72nd down there and plug it. And Cushing said, no need to, my men can hold this line. And he was going to put his remaining artillery pieces and him there to stop it. That's the section where Armistead came across. And that's when Webb really second-guessed himself, that he should have had the 72nd, that he did that mistake, and he was going to lose the whole war because of that. So they kind of regrouped. The shelling stopped. There was smoke all over the place. Let's fast forward 2 days, because I love to tell stories about stupid newspaper reporters, because I was one. After the battle, the Union wins. Newspaper reporters, they talk to the victors, they quote them, and several of them said, they won this great victory, and they were mad at each other. Why were they mad at each other? Because they were yelling at each other. Well, we know why they were yelling. They couldn't hear from the gunfire. They couldn't hear so much. So you can't believe everything you read in the newspapers. That's the story on that. So you had that artillery fire going up. It all of a sudden starts, and those soldiers, 12,000 Confederates, come out of the woods to come after them. And the Union artillery starts taking them apart. They keep coming in line. They wanted to keep them in line so when they did fire, they can mass shots, and it's more of an impact than a shot here and a shot there. So you had all that going on. They get up to the rail line there at the Emmitsburg Road. Why they didn't take that down earlier, who knows, with the artillery. Because the South had to stop and get back in line, and a lot of them died right there at that rail line by that road. And that's also where they were in musket range. Remember Penn Smith and the extra rifles. They again just really decimated them. If you go and you take a look at Gettysburg, at that field, it's only a mile. And this thing was started and ended in less than an hour. But it's someplace, if you look at it, it looks like it's totally straight. It's not. It kind of comes up and comes down, and some of the Union soldiers there said, we're looking and nobody's in front of us, and 2 seconds later there's a brigade that pops up right in front of them. There's other actions, other units from the left flank of the Philadelphia Brigade swings out, stops some of the Southern soldiers on the southern right flank. The left flank comes up towards a barn and comes up there, and I think they were from Louisiana, and they were stopped. If you go there today, it's just to the left of the McDonald's. I hate that little strip. Kind of ruins it, but that's where it is. And they get stopped. But Armistead keeps coming. He doesn't have many people left on him. If you've seen the movie Gettysburg, he puts the hat on the sword and says, "Follow me, boys." And he breaches the line. He makes it through. There's other Union soldiers rushing up to the line. Webb is trying to get that 72nd off the Hancock to come up, and they're not quite coming. And part of it is people don't think they really knew who Webb was because he wasn't in charge that long. And there was a flag, a young boy holding one of the flags, and he wanted him to go up to the wall. And the kid wouldn't do it, so he was struggling with the kid to get the flag, and the boy was shot and killed by a Confederate soldier. And then Webb helped take it up. Webb also won a Congressional Medal of Honor, you don't win it, you're awarded it a number of years later. Webb went on to be a teacher at the City College of New York for decades after the war. But all this is going on. And finally, there just wasn't enough Southern troops to push through that advantage. Lee had kept some artillery pieces in reserve, but they were moved back when the bombardment was going on, so they would be ready to be used. But where they put them in wet field, they weren't quite sure, and it took them too long to find them. So there was really no support for Pickett and Pickett's men and Armistead. Armistead made it We get 10 feet past that wall. There's a marker there now where he died. And he was, he made it that way. He was great friends with Hancock, and there's an exchange of words about Hancock and what he actually said. And Hancock was actually wounded. You can see where he was wounded from where Armistead was fatally shot. Didn't take long. Like I said, it was over in an hour. South started going back. The Union soldiers went to that wall, and they started saying, Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg. It was their, they got even for what happened to Northern troops trying to go up that hill at Fredericksburg earlier on. Major, major victory there. The South retreats. Lee goes out in front and says, it's all my fault, it's all my fault. It tells Pickett to line up his men in case there's a counterattack. And Pickett basically says, they're all dead on the field. I have no division left. The North is gearing up. They did not push the South. They stayed within the walls. That night it started raining. The next day was July the 4th. Lots of rain, and Lee retreated. Meade did not follow. And Lincoln really gave him a rough time. Why aren't you following me? You can end it now. Eventually he did, and I think Meade can be faulted a little bit because first time he was in charge of this big of an army, he did have some reserve corps that he could have sent after him, but he waited a little too long, and Lee did escape back to Virginia. So it was kind of a loss there. But it they saved the day for the Union that day. I said I did 3 books, and I told you a little bit, I was talking this afternoon, maybe this evening, a little bit about my second book. As I was finishing the manuscript on this one, I went to my friend's flower shop. He sold some of my local books and things. And I was telling him about all this great research and what was going on. And he said, did you meet my wife's cousin? I said, who's your wife's cousin? And it turns out he was a curator, or is a curator, of the J. Howard Wirt Collection, largest private collection of artifacts from Gettysburg. Amazing the things that are in it, including the podium that Lincoln used in the Gettysburg Address. I got to stand behind it 7 years ago. It's a great thrill. I get tingly around my ears and hair and everything, some of these things. Craig, for the Pickett's Charge book, had photographed some of the artifacts that he had connected with Pickett's Charge, including the stars off of Armistead's uniform in my hand. It's just amazing what it was, and it had so much. After the book came out, Craig said, love your book. Would you do one with me on the whole collection and the Wirt family? You can't, I couldn't turn that down. These artifacts in the Wirt collection, if you saw the movie Lincoln, he was great friends with Thaddeus Stevens, and actually Stevens lived for a time in Gettysburg, and Wirt's dad was on council with him. So there's a lot of Thaddeus Stevens artifacts in there. But if you saw the movie Lincoln, towards the end you saw Stevens with a walking stick. I had the real one in my handbook. That's great. One of the other personal things in it, General Barlow. Barlow's Knoll, he was severely wounded at Gettysburg. His saddle is in this collection. I talked about my relatives in the 61st New York. Their original leader was Barlow. I said, I need to see and feel this saddle. I said, I bet you my relatives saw it. I wonder if they felt it too. And there's just so many things within this collection that are just unique. And it's both Northern and Southern. Henry Kidd Douglas has a lot of stuff. One of Lee's commanders in this. It's just this great collection to have. So that's how I got to my second book. The third book was a book called Emotional Gettysburg, something a little bit different. If you've heard of the painter Andrew Wyeth, right? Really great, probably one of the best 20th century painters. He taught one painter who lived on the property. It's now part of the conservancy. A guy named Carl Kerner. And if you know Wyeth paintings, sometimes you'll see a German soldier in a helmet. That's Carl's grandfather. Lived right there. Carl is the only painter to be individually taught by Andy and his sister. And if you see Carl's paintings, indeed, they have a Wyeth touch. But he said to me one day, and I've known him for years, let's go to Gettysburg. Show me some places that mean something. And what he did, he painted 20 original paintings, not of reenactments and soldiers, and there's one monument in there and one reenactor, but it's kind of scenes. I mentioned earlier about Lee coming out to greet the defeated troops of Pickett's charge. Carl's done 2 paintings of that area. And when we were coming back from Gettysburg that day, when we visited there, Carl said, every place we went today, what was the most impactful for you? I said, where Lee was. And Carl had the same idea. And we were 3 or 4 different places that day. And we were talking about it. And this book goes into a little bit of different perspectives. And, I said, this had to be Lee's saddest day as commander. His vaunted army has always come through for him. He put him out there, and they're just thoroughly defeated. That had to do something. I mean, that had to be really tear him up. And Carl said, I had a different feeling. I felt anger, is what Carl said. Anger of the survivors who went out in this seemingly, doomed charge from the beginning and lost to their brothers and their sons and all their neighbors. So, it was kind of funny. We were both there, and I kind of gravitated more to Lee and he did to the survivors. But we did this all over. Talked about Lincoln, the cover. I'm sorry I don't have any books. We actually sold out. The publisher just ordered a second printing. But the cover is a witness tree. A tree was there at the time. And he transposed a face of Lincoln onto the tree. And it looks really good. One of my favorites, then I'll get back to Pickett's charge, is something called Heaven and Hell. And it's a 44th monument, New York monument, up on Little Round Top. And you can look down, you can see the Valley of Death and that area. And if you look up through it, you can see the heavens coming in. And it's really just kind of impactful as it goes. So, so I've actually done those 3. I want to close with the story, and then I'll take questions. I just want to tell you about that monument and that court case. The 72nd thought they were being really, lessened by not having their monument up at the wall. And the whole idea at Gettysburg were monuments were placed where units did their most fighting or important fighting, and they wanted to be at the wall. Webb didn't think they deserved to be there. A lot of people in the 71st said they didn't have to get there. It got fairly contentious. They filed the lawsuit and went through the courts. And finally, the court says they should be at the wall too. So if you go up there today, you see the 71st at the angle, 72nd, very distinctive big monument with a soldier using his rifle as kind of battering ram to hit a Southern soldier. Then you have the 69th in front of the copse of trees. I was up there on the 150th anniversary. My book actually just came out. And it was really kind of rainy, stormy a couple weeks before that. And one monument was toppled. The top of the 72nd came off. I can't tell you the number of people saying, see, it should have been back on Hancock. Actually, during that, if you went up, you wouldn't notice it. They put it up and they wired it up until the anniversary was over. Then they took it out and fixed it. And I was up with him weeks afterwards, and it seemed funny to see that monument with no top of it, but kind of interesting. you know what my book's about. When I was up there at the 150th, I was doing a book signing, and a woman came up, oh, Pickett's Church, I loved it. I was telling her what it's about, you know, it's on the back. She buys it. The next day was July the 3rd, and I'm doing my last book signing, and I see her running at me, and her husband's trying to catch her. She said, you're the one who wrote this book. It got wet last night, and I didn't even care. She was a big Southern sympathizer. You never know who you run into. There was somebody related to Longstreet that came there, and somebody from Pickett, and you know, I love going up talking with them. Same, you know, talking before groups like this, because I get so much out of it when I do it. But you know, it was pretty interesting. Actually, as they reenacted on the 150th, the Pickett's Charge itself, and there was thousands of people walked across that field from the lines up to the wall. I was live on Pennsylvania Cable Network, and I had my back to him, and I kept looking over this, and it's just hordes of people coming at me. It was some sight. It was really interesting to be up there on the 150th. But that's my story, and that's why I wrote it, because I thought these guys really deserve to have their story, and I was so lucky that, you know, there was so much material and written letters and back and forth. Wirt helped a lot. He actually was involved in a lot of the reunions right after the war, and he actually wrote a lot of the copy for it. He, like I said, he lived in Gettysburg. He was a teacher and had just graduated from Pennsylvania College, now Gettysburg College, and taught in Harrisburg later. And I had all of his writings for both books too. So it's, you know, you never know where the books will find. I tell people the books tell me to write them. That certainly happened here, but that's my story. You have questions? Anybody?
Is Mr. Wirt in relation to Jeffrey Wirt?
Jeffrey Wirt, no, that I know of, yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Craig has told me. No, but it's kind of interesting family. They started collecting things. American Revolution. Actually, we're doing photographs of the artifacts at Schiffer Publishing, a great publishing house, especially when you have to deal with photographs and reproductions. And we took Craig brought him in by his van, and they lifted it up to the second floor in the studio, so we could get them taken. We're up there one day. That's how I got to touch a lot of them, because I helped with the camera and stuff. And I told him that I was giving a talk on the American Revolution that night on my book on the Battle of the Brandywine. And he said, you know, we have these spurs that were both at Valley Forge and at Gettysburg from the Zook family. He said, you want to take them? And he never allows anything out of his sight. He's had stuff stolen. But, you know, I had been working with him so long. I said, you bet if you don't, you know, if you trust me, I'll get them right back to you. He said, you know, I just had a conversation with Jay Howard, who had been dead for like 50 years, 60 years. But, you know, Craig really is in tune with this, and he knows that collection just forwards and backwards. He's really interesting. So I took the spurs and got to show and tell and talk on the American Revolution. But it's, you know, just putting all of it together. It's, if you love history, just to be in there and get to see this and feel this is what an experience. Yes?
I heard a speaker recently say that the Meade didn't actually want to go to Gettysburg that first day in the evening because he didn't think that was a good place to have a battle. But Hancock convinced him it was a super place to have it because they had all the high ground.
High ground.
Is that?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. The whole battle, how it started. You know, Lee didn't want to have it there. You know, Buford Cavalry and the Confederates kind of shot and everything just kind of come there. So it wasn't really picked by either one. Meade was further south. You're right, Hancock came up and he said, this is great ground. As Meade was coming up, he found a couple other areas that could have been high ground closer to Washington. So it was, you know, he had a couple places in mind, but, you know, after that first day, I don't think they had a they really had a choice. Everybody was just kind of congregating, and it just took on a kind of life of its own at that point.
I often thought that it must have been a chilling effect on me when he saw that, what's his first of the first division.
Oh, Reynolds?
When Reynolds,
Yeah.
Reynolds was killed, they were bringing him back, and
Yeah.
Meade saw that.
Yeah,
Had to go on up there.
I think so. You know, it just anything in that war that was that personal, because he knew Reynolds, and he was first brought it back into town. The building's still there in the middle of town, and they brought him back in front of Cemetery Hill, and then got him back to where he was buried. But yeah, no, that whole battle. And what's sometimes overlooked is the civilian impact, what happened in the town itself. Schiffer actually had another book that came out, it's probably 20-some years from now, but it was all kind of the people in the town and how they either went out or they hid in cellars or they were hiding Union officers and men as a retreat through that town. It just, there's just so many aspects to Gettysburg. It's really interesting.
Bruce, fantastic research. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
speaking to us about it. You were speaking tonight a lot about the Philadelphia Brigade
Yep.
specifically, but how far beyond the Philadelphia Brigade to the left and right of them did you go?
I did a little bit, because like I said, when Lee said copse of trees, that was the Philadelphia Brigade. And I talked about the other units that kind of rushed up and back them, because they saw what was happening and the hole and kind of rushed up, and you had Delaware on the right and some that. So I did some of that, but I had most of it was the Philadelphia, and that was great research, and again the focal point with them. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of stories out there.
Was there other officers than Webb that kind of thought the day was lost or whatever? That's kind of the first I've heard of that.
Yeah, Webb thought it was really personal when he saw them coming through. There was a couple officers not from the Philadelphia Brigade. Again, they saw what was happening. One was from New York and just kind of said they didn't wait. They just went up to do it. So there was some of that tension there. And of course, they didn't know if Lee had troops coming up to exploit that hole that they punctured, and that's what should have happened, which didn't happen. Yeah.
Was there a kind of a theory of why Cushing's battery seemed to be the weak point?
Yeah, what happened was that Cushing, young officer again, lieutenant, he thought he could do it all, it was important. He was there, and even, he had lost some of his artillery pieces, and so he didn't have a full battery there. And I think they just got overwhelmed, and Webb should have said, well, you take this part and I'll bring the 72nd up and fill it.
So
Yeah.
they were pretty much hub to hub on the line,
Yep,
firing canister at point blank.
Yep.
And they couldn't keep them off.
yep, that was it. And, of course, the Union was taking casualties too, so it was pretty hot and heavy, and they lost some of the people in that initial artillery barrage coming in also.
My
Yeah.
understanding was after the war, Sickles and Mark Twain got to know each other quite well. And the story goes that Mark Twain once said that Sickles had made so much political mileage out of his wound at Gettysburg that he was given a choice between getting his missing leg back and losing the other one. He'd lose the other one.
Now, I hadn't heard that, but that sure sounds like Mark Twain to me. He was a character. He absolutely was. That's a good one. Anything else? We okay?
We're great. Well, again,
Thank you so much for everything.
thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I collect these, by the way, so.
Just so everybody knows, Bruce is going to be in the back selling some of his books and hopefully doing some signing.
Yeah, I'll be back if you want to talk, take a look at the books, take a look at the map on the round.
Also, Also, please join us next month. We're going to have David Welter here talking about Tempest at Ox Hill, the Battle of Chantilly. So a smaller engagement you may not be familiar with, right there just before the beginning of the Maryland campaign in '62. That's a really interesting book and a fascinating little engagement that we don't hear enough about. So please come on back, join us again, and you folks have a great rest of your month. And, of course, happy Thanksgiving.